talk a little bit today about instructional excellence in correctional facilities and some of the best practices for teaching incarcerated individuals. My name is Stephanie Pittman. I'm the Director of Community Education at Southwestern Illinois College. And prior to moving into the director role, I taught GED at the local county jail. And so just a little bit about me, I'm from East St. Louis. An 07 Golden Apple Scholarship awardee. It's a scholarship for students who want to go into education in the state of Illinois. I got my bachelor's in English Lit from SIU Carbondale, my master from Lindenwood University, Belleville. And as I stated previously, I'm the Director of Community Education at Southwestern Illinois College. I'm also an educational consultant and the founder of Products of Practice. And I'm the author of Free Transitions, The Social Conditioning of Black Children and Teachers in Charter Schools. So I think that I have a background that is very unique in education. My journey is very unique in education, and the perspectives that I've developed as a result are not necessarily unique, but they truly have defined my perception and my perspective of the best practices in education. And I believe that the most incredible, the most powerful, the most effective educators are those who teach students how to be self-led. Okay, and so that was the inspiration behind Free Transitions. So if you want to check it out, it's on Amazon for $4.44. But we're going to go ahead and move forward. So with teaching in any correctional institution, one thing that we have to understand is that every inmate had an educational journey that started in a classroom. So despite the fact that they have, different family backgrounds, we have cultural differences that we obviously express through learning, as well as how we appear physically may differ from person to person. But what's more profound than any academic lessons we're taught and that they were taught is the social conditioning and the grooming that more than likely occurred during their public school experience. Okay, so there's a lot of that happens. Our school experiences are our foundational years where we're learning about the world as well as how we see ourselves. So I think it's important that before we start talking about instructional excellence in jails or prison settings, that we talk about the school to prison pipeline. And that simply refers to the practices in public schools of predominantly Black and brown children that foster a mindset and belief system that increases the likelihood of them being cycled into the criminal justice system. So this is obviously not the exact definition that you'll find online, but this is my definition of what I believe the school to prison pipeline is. Although people of all backgrounds experience incarceration, Black and Hispanic males make up 59% of those incarcerated in the US. So this is important information to know in the same way that we learn about our students and their backgrounds and their cultures in a traditional school setting. It's important that when you're going into an environment with justice impacted people or people who are incarcerated, that you understand how they may have ended up in these predicaments. So some of the things that might occur that are normalized in school settings with predominantly Black and brown children are the extremes of control for the purpose of security and discipline. And obviously we're living in a society now where there are many things that are happening more frequently than ever. I remember growing up hearing about Columbine, and that was just like, that was extremely rare, right? It wasn't something that I consistently heard about, but now we're hearing more and more about there being school shootings and violence in schools. But even prior to that, and even in communities that have never had the history of school shootings whatsoever, if they are a predominantly Black school, the likelihood of them experiencing these things is higher. So metal detectors, being searched upon entry at school, wearing school uniforms, self-contained classrooms, right? So we know that, I remember in the early 90s that even for students who had IEPs or 504 plans, a lot of times they would be in a self-contained classroom all day long, and they did not have the opportunity to socialize with other students, okay? Full days of detention with no recess, limited restroom breaks, no physical movement, Saturday detentions, police presence on school campuses, having your personal items collected upon arrival. So a lot of these things are things that people of all backgrounds have experienced in schools. However, these are more common in those predominantly Black and brown schools. Okay, and some of us may have experienced all of these and never experienced being incarcerated, but when we combine this with systemic limitations, the unaddressed trauma and poor choices, sometimes it leads to incarceration. So it's a culmination of these things that creates a psychological environment or a psychological perspective that would make a person more comfortable or predisposed to being in a jail or correctional facility. So I created this little chart, and it just, for me, it just kind of shows the combination of circumstances that many students may experience that could lead them into incarceration. So this is not in any particular order, but this is just, these are some of the circumstances that students may experience, okay, that increases the chances that they might be funneled through the school to prison pipeline. So we know just based on research that a lot of times students who are have learning disabilities, who are suspended extensively over periods of time, are also students who, you know, may skip school, who may be truant because they're uninvested in the school environment once they feel like they're so behind. There could be family challenges, and oftentimes most of it is personal choices, but students who experience a lot of these are often, you know, expelled, and sometimes when they're expelled, they end up in alternative school settings, and then maybe even juvenile detention centers, and some of these students eventually become inmates. So I've seen a combination of all of these things in the student bodies that I've supported, whether it's in alternative schools or, you know, just my experience instructing in the jail setting. So all of these things play a huge role in the development of at-risk minority youth. So one of the things that I want to talk about is the differences in a traditional classroom and the corrections classroom setting. Typically, if this presentation is done live, there's a discussion that's had with participants about the traditional classroom setting. When we think of traditional school, what do we think of, right? So, you know, I think of it being a place of learning, obviously. I think of, you know, classes moving at scheduled times, discussion is happening. I think of different types of students with different personalities that express themselves differently. They may wear different clothing. They may wear different hairstyles, right? I think of various styles of leadership from principals at schools. So if you're at a multi-level school where there's different admin for each grade level, I think about the differences in how people approach their leadership and how they manage teachers. And I think about the differences in how teachers manage students, right? That's your very traditional classroom / school setting where you're going to get a variety of personalities and perspectives and approaches to how rules are enforced from time to time. But for people who are going into a jail or correction setting, it's important for you to understand that in the corrections classroom setting, it is the Department of Corrections, simply put. And that is the best perspective to have, because it's super important that you understand that this environment is not a traditional classroom environment, okay? So the classroom is the Department of Corrections. You adhere to all the policies of the Department of Corrections when you're there, and for your own safety, livelihood, as well as the well-being of other staff, you must adhere to all policies and procedures within the framework of the service you're there to provide. So I want to talk a little bit about the importance of understanding the environment that you're entering in. When I started my teaching assignment inside of the local jail, was in a medium security facility. And one of the things that I struggled with was understanding what the expectations were for me as an educator before I actually had to sit down with the staff and talk with the people that, you know, would essentially be my liaisons and my support, because I was going on YouTube and I was looking at different videos, and a lot of the perspectives that I was hearing were very extreme perspectives of what happens in a jail classroom, or what happens in a jail environment, what happens to correctional officers. And as we know, the most polarizing, engaging stories are the ones that are going to get the most views. And a lot of times those perspectives fall in the extremes. So I thought it was important to create a resource that gave a balanced perspective of what a teacher, what an educator should expect when going into that environment. So here are some things that are extremely important before you even begin instruction in a jail. First and foremost, you need to make sure you complete the PREA training, the Prison Rape Elimination Act. That training needs to be completed. It's super important that you understand the nuances of power struggles that occur in controlled environments, and that particular training is vital in understanding just how sensitive the balance is as it relates to your relationship with students or your students who are inmates. Super important that you understand how some of these inappropriate things develop. The importance of understanding the safety of not only yourself, but the safety of the students that you are supporting. You'll need to have your background check. Obviously, your school will partner with whatever institution you're teaching at to make sure that happens. But I also would strongly suggest a tour if possible. So if you have the ability to tour the facility that you are going to be working in, I think that it's vital that you do that. Now, some people may feel differently, and I get it, but I think it's important for you to understand the environment that you're teaching in, understand the circumstances and the conditions that people are living in, so that it gives you some insight on some of the behavior you may see, or why people possess the mindsets that they have in this environment. Another thing that's super important is meeting with liaisons or staff to talk through policies, procedures, and things to be aware of. So 9 times out of 10, there will be a point of contact for you in your school, or you in your college, or however you want to put it. You'll have a point of contact, and that person will be responsible for giving you some of the information that you need. But it's super important that you, as the educator, are looking to learn about how the best ways to function in the environment from a security and logistics standpoint, because you are not in a regular classroom environment. And it's super important that you understand that your personal aspirations and beliefs about the freedoms that you would like your students to have is very separate from the reality of the environment that you're in, okay? So every institution is different. The best thing to do is adhere to the policies of your model correctional officers as much as possible, okay? Because the security levels in your jail may vary, or the prison that you're at may vary, okay? The reason I say adhere to the policies of the model correctional officer is because the truth of the matter is those are the people who have already successfully navigated the power dynamic between inmates and staff. They are the ones who are well respected. They are the ones who are rarely ever having power struggles and getting into altercations. These are the people that inmates and staff respect. Inmates and staff alike respect. And those are the people that you should model yourself after from the standpoint of conduct and policies. okay? It's super important that even your volunteers, I know that for some institutions, there are people who volunteer for jails. They come in, they get the background check, and then they're invited to come into the facility. Super important that even your volunteers understand. And if you're a volunteer and you volunteer, it's super important that you understand that you need to follow the policies and procedures of the institution that you are volunteering in, okay? So that's vital, because the last thing you want is to be someone who represents an opportunity to break the rules. Your presence should reinforce the fact that, okay, we're all on one page, we're aligned, and you're here to learn as a student. But from a security standpoint, these are things that I think that people need to internalize as much as possible, okay? So the other thing that you want to do is you want to identify do's and don'ts for classroom materials. Again, it's not a traditional classroom, so something that you may think is very small could be something that could cause a problem later on. So no staples or any metal materials that can be used. I know sometimes, you know, we staple our work together to pass it out to our students. Well, in this environment, you probably want to invest in a stapleless stapler. They have them online on Amazon. But basically, it just holds the papers together without the metal. No pencils or utensils with metal. No binders with metal for student use. You're not allowed to bring your cell phone or your personal smartwatches in with phone capabilities into the environment. Now, this may be different for, you know, depending on what institution you're in, but in most cases, you're not going to be allowed to bring your phone inside the facility, okay? So super important that you're vigilant about these things. Make sure that everything that you need for class is prepared before you go into the classroom. Make sure that before you have your official first day of instruction, you've toured the environment, you've toured the classroom that you're going to be in, because in a way it's going to give you a sense of comfort, and you know, you can sort of build some routines into instruction to keep you prepared, okay, and on your toes, okay? Nothing from cells in, nothing from classroom goes back into the cells. So you as a teacher, if a student, you know, writes or not creates, but is completing an assignment and you want to grade the assignments, you can do that. You can take that work with you. But typically, none of the assignments or none of the work or anything that you guys are using inside of the classroom is going to be allowed back into the cells. Again, this may differ depending on what facility you're at, but most of the time you want to minimize, because it could be that they're allowed to, but if they're not allowed to, do not allow students to take any materials from the classroom into their cells, okay, or back into the blocks, okay? Most of the time they'll be pat down before they go back to their blocks, but you want to make sure that you emphasize this day one when you start giving out materials. Another thing that's super important is arriving early for pat down and search. When you arrive, you will be pat down and you'll be searched by a member of the staff. And typically, these environments, the majority of your security staff is probably going to be male. So if you're a female, 9 times out of 10, if you're a woman or if you're a female, when you arrive, you will be pat down, but 9 times out of 10, you're going to be searched by another female sergeant or someone on staff, because they typically don't allow the men to pat down the staff that are entering. So there will be a woman assigned to you or someone who will be asked to come and search you. Now, here's the thing. You are completely subject to whatever is going on when you arrive. So if you arrive and there's a lockdown happening, your class starts at 8:30 and you arrive at 8:25, you just have to wait. There are things that happen from time to time that are unexpected. And so for your safety, there may be a delay. There are times where you'll arrive if something has happened and it's extreme and it's something that the staff is trying to get under control. You may have to come back the next day to teach your class. But the point is, developing a mindset that is flexible and open and understanding to the fact that you're not necessarily on your own time. Okay, so the best thing you can do is arrive as early as you can. If you have your materials, you know, you're going to have them in a cart or something that can easily be checked. Everything that you have will be checked upon arrival. So just try to make sure that you are mindful of all of the things that you should not have on your person, i.e. your phone, typically jewelry, dangling jewelry, things of that nature. When I go in, I typically don't wear any jewelry at all, but be aware of the fact that you not having or having things that you should not have on your person is going to slow down the process for you to get into your classroom and instruct class. Okay, so you want to make sure that you're aware of that. And then too, the timeliness component is a huge part of building positive relationship with the staff, because the jail is on a schedule, or the prison or whatever facility you're at is on a schedule. And so when you arrive early enough to make sure that you're instructing on time and you're leaving on time, that communicates respect for the staff. We lead with respect through timeliness, adherence to policies and procedures, enveloping policy compliance and lessons from day one. Okay, so despite the fact that you have these cool lessons that you want to teach, you want to make sure that you are enveloping the importance of you as an educator following the rules from day one. Because you're being closely watched by everyone, simply put, and it's for security purposes, period. You're a person from the outside, whether you feel like you're working for the school and there's a partnership or not. You are not a staff member of the Department of Corrections. So when you come from the outside, people are observing you closely to see what is the impact of this person being in this environment and how is it going to affect the interactions between inmates and other staff when this person leaves. Okay, super important that you are developing those positive relationships with staff. You're courteous, you know, you're respectful, you know, you're not asserting yourself in any way that makes staff or anybody else that's there with the inmates 24/7 feel like you are looking to engage in some type of power struggle, because it'll make your time there harder. Okay, and the reason why is because that staff, the correctional officers, are your first line of defense in the event of an emergency. So another caveat too is that a lot of times the jail is understaffed. You know, your facility may be fully staffed and there may be plenty of people there, but there are many instances where the jail is understaffed, or we know factually that the number of inmates is going to outnumber the number of staff, right? So since we know that, we have to understand just how sensitive the security of every person is there, and we need to make sure that our presence is not creating any unnecessary problems for the staff that's already there. Okay, so one of the things that I've learned over time is that everything speaks, especially in controlled environments. And I refer to this as, you know, just the 5 sense sensitivity when you're in a facility. So everybody's 5 senses are heightened in a controlled environment for safety and security. Okay, so the first thing people are going to do is they're going to see you, right? So it's important to try to adopt a standard uniform when you're instructing in a jail setting. And this goes for, it could be virtual, it could be, you know, in person with security, but I was in a situation where, you know, I instructed inside of a classroom, a secure classroom, and it was just myself and the students that I was teaching. So it could be myself in a group of 7, a group of 9, a group of 10. It would all depend on attendance. But I'm literally inside of the jail classroom by myself. So in a situation like this, which it could be the case for you, but it may not be, it's important that your appearance is not communicating anything other than professionalism. And again, like I said, observe the staff. How would you describe their outfits? Their uniform, essentially. And again, though everybody has different body types and things of that nature, it's important that you try to cover up, especially if you are teaching a men's class, or you need to cover up if you're teaching a men or a women's class. But an environment where a person has not, has little to no socialization, especially for men, they've had little to no socialization or contact with women outside of their brief interactions with staff. You need to make sure that you're presenting yourself in a way that is modest and appropriate for the environment. Okay. One of the things that I did was I just adopted a Black uniform. And again, you don't have to do what I'm doing, but that's what I did. If it's not Black, extra dark colors that are, that'll cover you up. Nothing that's super clingy. And again, most of the time, the staff will not let you back if you're not dressed appropriately. But I mean, on a busy day, you decide to switch it up, you have on an appropriate outfit. Something as simple as your outfit being different from one day to the next could draw unnecessary attention to you, even if the outfit is appropriate. So I would say develop a standard look for yourself where you're covered up. When it comes to makeup, neutral makeup, right? You're not varying your appearance a ton from one week to the next. You're not wearing red lipstick today, purple lipstick tomorrow, green lipstick the next day. You're neutrally dressed and you're neutral in appearance. Okay. When it comes to nails, no long bright colored nails. Now, if you already have your nails done or something like that, I get it. But here's the thing. It's super important that you are not in a very obvious way taking advantage of freedoms that the staff does not have the ability to take advantage of. So again, this may differ from person to person, but something as simple as wearing a small dangly earring, having bright colored nails, every day you're in a different type of outfit, is something that people visually, they can visually process and set you apart from the staff visually. And again, that could happen anyway, but I believe that perception is reality. So you don't want to intensify the contrast between yourself and the staff in that way. That would be my advice. Okay. You also don't want to draw any negative sexualized attention to yourself unnecessarily. And that doesn't always happen, but it could. Okay. No open toe shoes, obviously. No loud perfumes and colognes. Okay. So that having been said, something as simple as that, you get a new perfume, you spraying it all over yourself, and I love perfumes and things of that nature, but I'm not going to go inside that environment with loud fragrance on, different fragrances it's distracting in an environment where these things are not allowed, right? So again, not to say that there aren't correctional officers that wear perfume, but I'm pretty sure that if they wear it modestly, where it's not reeking, where everybody can smell it as soon as they walk by, because that's distracting in a controlled environment. Okay. No food or beverages from outside, inside. Again, even if it's not a rule at your facility for you, you may be able to bring your lunch in or whatever the case may be. Do not do that. Don't do it. I'm only telling you what I wouldn't do. Do not bring any personal food or beverages inside, even if you can sit it down somewhere, even if you can put it in the refrigerator, whatever the case is. I personally would not bring anything inside of my classroom or in the facility that a student would not be able to have access to. Okay, so it's not to say that, you know, something bad will happen to you, but again, you are a visitor, so don't get too comfortable. Okay, don't accept food or snacks or gum or anything from inmates, period. Don't do it. So they may be able to have like snacks or items that they, you know, that they already had. They may be able to have it on their person and it not be against the rules for them to have an approved item from the jail with them. But do not exchange anything with them. Don't take food from them. Don't take a stick of gum. You don't know what's in it. Not only that, but it's against the rules. So don't do it. Okay. Do not touch them. So don't shake hands. Do not touch them. Do not pat them on the shoulders. Do not fist bump. Do not exchange any type of physical contact with inmates in any way, shape, or form. It has nothing to do with you being in danger of somebody attacking you. But again, it's about the perception. If correctional officers are not putting their hands on inmates, with the exception of instances where people are being searched or an altercation is being broken up or they're intervening, you should not be putting your hands on them and exchanging contact with them whatsoever, okay, for your own safety. And if you have any issues that come up that you are concerned about, or if you have accidentally, or if you did something on this list, don't worry, don't freak out. Just have a conversation with the staff about it to make sure, you know, especially if you're in doubt. Another thing to be mindful of your tone and volume. You're in class and, you know, discussion gets heated, or, you know, there's a situation that happens. Mind your tone. Speak respectfully, you know, address any conflict or confrontation with the energy you want to be met with as a respected adult. Okay, so be mindful of that, because you got to know that a lot of times small things can trigger power struggles. There are small things that trigger power struggles and altercations between people who students in this environment will refer to as the free world. So even in as free people who are not incarcerated, we can have a moment where we hear something or someone speaks to us in a certain tone, or their body language communicates something that causes us to feel triggered. And so that being said, that's especially the case in this environment, because every person in this environment has to be on high alert for their own safety, okay, and for the safety of other people. We kind of already talked about delays, but just remember that your schedule is based on the facility schedule. So that means that, you know, even if class is going wonderful and we're engaged in a discussion, unless there is a delay that is being caused by something that is happening at the facility, you yourself should not be late dismissing class. It's important that, you know, inmates are able to eat on time. You know, they have very few freedoms. Make sure that you are not complicating the schedule in any way by retaining students for longer or releasing them early, unless it is something that you communicated in advance with the staff. Because a lot of times the staff simply does not have they don't have the availability, the physical availability to be there every time you need something. For example, restroom breaks or something like that. Like if somebody says, I need to use the restroom, well, that's not something that should be happening on a case-by-case basis. There should be a system in place for people to use the restroom. So if class is 4 hours long, and you want to take a 5-minute restroom break, that needs to be something that is established so that at that time, somebody can plan to be there. And even when people plan to be there to release your students to use the restroom and bring them back in, a lot of times, again, there are delays, or, you know, maybe they don't get to you. It's nothing personal. It's just the fact that they have an entire community of people to be concerned with. And the number of students in your classroom does not exceed the number of people that they have to serve and support. So just keep that in mind. If there's a delay, for example, if there's lockdown or something happens right outside of the classroom, the only thing you can do is remain calm. Very important that you realize that as an educator, your energy is infectious. So the way you are responding and the way you are reacting to what's happening in the environment is going to have a direct impact on how inmates are perceiving you in the environment. So it's important that you're cool, you're calm, collected, you're chill. If something goes down, you're chill. You're even keel, you're calm, okay? That's super important. This is something that's super important, and it may differ from facility to facility, but if you are an adult ed teacher, or you're teaching a GED class or HSC classes, before you begin the actual days of instruction where you're teaching, there will be some pre-testing. So here's some guidelines you can follow for pre-testing. So you're typically going to do CASAS pre-testing. If you're in the state of Illinois, CASAS pre-testing for reading and math prior to the official start date. You need to make sure you prepare the environment. So depending on, you may be in an environment where there's no technology allowed, which I was, and you may be in an environment where technology is allowed. You need to make sure you prepare the test environment. So make sure your laptops are charged, the software is up to date prior to beginning the testing session. You want to make sure you're optimizing time. You need to make sure that you have the materials for testing already out and available, so that when students come in, they can just come in, you can read over the testing guidelines from the manual if necessary, and then they can begin testing. And obviously, they'll all be on different levels, so they will complete these tests at different times. So just make sure you have like some supplemental materials for early completers if they're not being taken out of the classroom upon completion. So, in some cases, it may be, okay, Pittman or whoever you are, when a person gets done, press the buzzer and we'll take them out, and we'll allow them to go back to their cells. Or it could be everybody has to stay in until the class block is over and everybody is finished. And 9 times out of 10, it's going to be the latter, because again, if the staff is, if they're understaffed, they may not have time to come and grab a person from the other side of the facility every time somebody finishes, okay? The other thing that I want to talk about is establishing a class routine that invests students in the learning process through leadership. So that having been said, every single inmate in this environment has had a different learning experience. They've had a different life experience. But what you want to be able to do as an instructor is make sure that what you're instilling is giving them a sense of purpose for their life, and that you are putting the ownership of their educational experience onto them. It's not about you being the person that comes in to say, this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it. No, at some point, your students need to be able to lead their own classroom in some type of way, and they need to be invested in the process and understand that their presence there is not only a privilege in the same way that your presence there is a privilege, right? Because you don't have a right to be there. You've been granted the privilege and access for the environment based on criteria you've met in the same way that they have to. So it's important that you find ways to invest them, okay? So what I did was I assigned daily reflection leaders within the first week of class. After we're done with testing within the first 5 days, we have an actual schedule of people who are going to lead class every day, meaning that you're going to bring an activity in, everybody's going to do the activity that you've assigned us all, because that, in my opinion, really creates a sense of community when everybody has to engage and participate. Now, even as a teacher, I will participate in these reflection activities when people will bring things in, but it's also important that you guys understand this, the sensitivity of you exercising discretion about sharing personal information about yourself. The only thing that people need to know is that you're the instructor of the class. If you see people from your community there, or people you went to school with, and they just happen to be in your classroom, then boom, they know you, they know where you're from. But at the end of the day, you don't want to be engaging in personal conversations in a way that is distracting students from the learning experience. Another thing too is making sure people are sharing their responses. So if there's a daily reflection activity that's being completed, everybody should share, right? So we want engagement and investment to be the standard in an environment where people have very little control. In the classroom, they have the ability to add to the quality of what's being experienced, not only by themselves, but by their peers, okay? Super important that you try to differentiate instruction, whether that's independent learning time, group and partner activities, and also allowing students to present their work. You'll find that within your classroom, you'll have extremely bright individuals who are capable of even, you'll learn from them. So just make sure that you're creating that community of investment and accountability so that people are excited about what they can contribute to their class environment. Last but not least, I really want to talk about personal excellence. And this is, in my opinion, the most important aspect of being an educator, period. Your personal excellence is going to lay the foundation for a successful experience everywhere you go, not just in the classroom, but just in life in general. And that for me means taking care of yourself. Okay, so you're taking care of yourself mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. So before you come into, you got to understand the environment that you are going into. You're going into an environment where there are many people who have been broken by life's experiences, and many people share the same perspectives about what the future holds. And a lot of those perspectives may not be positive. But it's important for you to be a light and a positive reflection of not only your community, but your organization. You represent an entire organization. You represent an entire college or school. So when people think about corrections education, or they think about students learning in a jail environment, they're going to associate it with the experience that they've had with you. And you want to be such a positive light that people look forward to creating more programming and developing more opportunities for inmates to learn as a result of your presence alone, because you operate in excellence. You're always on time. You're always dressed appropriately. You make the staff's job easier because you're not trying to pursue your own personal aspirations and change the environment as much as you can. But the goal is for you to help evolve the mindsets of the men and women that you're serving, okay? Another thing is holding yourself to high standards of personal discipline socially. So no gossiping, no foul language, no talking down about other staff and complaining, okay? So you're not doing any of that. If you have an experience, an unsavory experience with someone, a CEO, or you wake up on the wrong side of the bed, understand that your energy is being observed extensively, especially by your students. Naturally, they're going to be curious about you because you represent something different from what they're accustomed to. So they're looking to see what your responses are in challenging moments and situations. And sometimes you may even be challenged socially, but you minimize the possibility of being challenged in the environment by bringing a peaceful, balanced, accountable version of yourself to the classroom, okay? Being emotionally consistent. So understanding that whatever happened before you arrived, or you're leaving that on the outside because you're there to serve, period. Okay. Another thing is the importance of instructional consistency. It doesn't mean that every single day is going to look the same, but you have to understand that if you are an instructor and you are teaching for the adult education department at your school, you're teaching GED, these students need to be successful as a result of your instruction, meaning they need to be able to pass, their math section on the test, reading, whatever it is, they need to be finding success. So you need to be instructionally consistent in a way that helps students, develop some expectations around class, but also making sure that you are reviewing strategies daily so that they can be successful when it's time for them to test. It shouldn't be that one day is a free day where you guys are just hanging out and chilling. The next day is, a day where it's school is happening, okay? And believe it or not, they will genuinely appreciate you challenging them and pushing them to excellence, pushing them to rise above their emotions, their feelings, their anger, their frustrations. And a lot of times these things come up in class. You may be reading something and then someone expresses something personal that they're able to relate to as a result of it. And those things are great, but we want to make sure that instructionally we're consistent and the focus is the learning, okay? And not people leaning into their frustrations and the aspects of the environment that they can't control, even you, okay? Another thing too is, and this essentially goes with what I said previously, is not allowing the negative aspects of the environment to outweigh your purpose for being there. If you are a radically empathetic person and you have the heart of a servant, it's natural to be compelled to, and I don't want to say be compelled, but it's natural for you to be concerned and maybe sometimes be disturbed by what you see, but you can't allow the fact that misfortune and unfortunate circumstances, you can't allow those things to interfere with your purpose for being there. Your purpose is to not only be a source of hope, but for you to be a source of inspiration by being an example. Through your example as an educator, people should feel more confident about the future and more confident about their ability to lead themselves, okay? The other thing is don't discuss inmates' offenses with them or staff, period. It's vital that you not do that. It's super important that you don't know that. And if that information is given to you ahead of time, okay, but now you have information that you have to process. And we all have our own biases and opinions about certain people and certain situations. So that having been said, you now have all of this information, but you have to go into this environment and teach someone something, right? And based on your personal biases and your own personal trauma, the information that you know that was not necessary for you to do your job may impede on your ability to do a good job, right? Because you know too much. So, I mean, naturally, there are times where people will say, oh, this person did this or that. Respectfully say, you know what? I can't know that. Not I shouldn't or I don't want to. I can't know that. I can't talk about that with you because I'm just here to teach. I'm not supposed to know anything about what they've done, where they're from. It's not your business. Don't allow them to discuss their offenses in the classroom either, because again, what happens is it can become a breeding ground for, trauma bonding, and it can become a breeding ground for distractions. We're all here. Now what do? We can't lament on the past. We have to focus on moving ahead and try to be a master redirector, because there will be times where you have to redirect conversations and attention and energy, but do it in a way where it's like, I'm not forcing anybody to do anything, but I just want to make sure that we're on the right track. Be human, right? It's not that you're going to be a robot and you're not going to engage or laugh or, learn from students, but understand that you're there to do a very specific job, okay? And remember that your role is unique and special, and it can make or break future opportunities for future educators and students. The access that inmates have to educational opportunities or opportunities for enrichment are few and far between, right? So understand that the interactions that you're having with them and the interactions that the staff are having with you are building a narrative about the necessity of you being there. If you being there causes power struggles because you're having inappropriate conversations, if they're taking things out of the classroom into the bunks and they're able to make weapons with those things, you know, it's these small things that we as people who are free think very little of. These are the things that could create a situation where your institution, your school is no longer welcome there, because it's literally, it's not just about inmates preferring you over another staff, but it's about the fact that your presence presents an opportunity to defy the rules and regulations because you're not willing to be in alignment and work as a team with the rest of the staff. So what you want is, you want your presence to be so profound and so positive that people are in search of other opportunities for other inmates to learn, that they want to grow the program that you're offering, okay? Okay, we had a small room at first where only 5 people can fit. Now we're going to move you to another wing, and we want a number of 20 people to be able to, you know, the goal is for there to be growth as a result of your presence being there, not stagnation, okay? And then if you're in doubt, follow the policies and ask for help. Never assume that you doing what you think is right personally is always the best answer. A lot of times, if you're in doubt, it's something that needs to be addressed, and you may need to make sure that you're following the rules. So that's all I have for you guys today. I hope that this presentation has been helpful. I hope that educators who are going into this environment have a positive perspective of what they're getting ready to do. Know that you have the power to compel people to change their own lives and their own circumstances through education, and that this is a divine opportunity. I would say stay away from tons of content that puts you in the extreme states of emotion, because what you need to do is you need to balance and ground yourself before you go into any environment, but especially this environment, and be in a calm, peaceful, poised, positive light for your students is going to make all of the difference. So if you guys want to reach out to me or ask questions, my information is on the slide. Again, it's been a pleasure sharing this information with you, and reach out if you need support or questions. Thanks. Have a good day. Bye.